Today, I'm going to talk to you about a band called Anthrax, the fourth band in the big four of thrash, the others being Megadeth, Slayer, and Metallica. And Anthrax, out of the four, is the only one that comes from the East Coast, hailing from New York. And so this list is going to entail my opinions of their studio albums, starting from what I consider to be their least impressive album to my absolute favorite album, worst to first. So Anthrax, here we go. Alright, so first up on our list is going to be Stomp 442. This album, it's, with Anthrax, quote-unquote bad albums, they're really not that bad. I mean, this album's got some bright spots, and I mean, it's not really a bad album, but there's just nothing really memorable about it. There's just, it's just another one of those kind of blasé albums. They did a whole bunch of, kind of blasé albums all throughout the 90s that, like, as you were listening to them, sounded pretty good, but then as soon as the album ended, you couldn't even remember the name of one song on the album, and Stomp 442 is the embodiment of this. Okay, next up on our list is what I would consider to be Anthrax's debut album, depending on who you ask, Fistful of Metal from 1984. This album, has some positives. It's got Danny Lilker on the bass, who eventually went to form the Nuclear Assault, and also went on to Brutal Truth. So, it's kind of nostalgic and cool for that reason. But again, this album is just kind of unmemorable. Never really did it for me. It's got some parts where you kind of bang your head, but overall, I just consider this album to be kind of boring, to be honest with you. So. Next up on my list is going to be Anthrax's The Sound of White Noise. This album's not a bad album. It's a good album. I still throw it on every now and then when I'm in the mood for that, more commercially oriented metal, which I got to be honest is pretty rare. But every now and then you get in the mood for it. I don't know what happened to Anthrax. They were doing really good, at the end of the 80s. And then they got rid of their main singer, and they picked up John Bush, which is an excellent singer. But their whole sound just kind of got commercialized and just sound kind of real processed. And, you could tell that they were trying to do the whole appeal to the masses thing that a lot of bands were doing in the early 90s. And that's where The Sound of White Noise comes in. This album, for me, is almost interchangeable with Volume 8. It's good, it's the kind of music you maybe throw on, at like a party where not everyone there is a metalhead, and you want like something that's like heavy but like not too offensive, but I mean that's kind of antithetical to the whole idea of what metal is. I mean, metal's supposed to be offensive. That's like kind of what's so cool about it, is that it makes you think by offending you into thought, so so this whole commercial thing that Anthrax was doing in the 90s, starting with The Sound of White Noise, was really not my thing, and kind of when I started to lose interest in Anthrax a little bit. So, that's my thoughts on this album. Next up on my list is Anthrax's Volume 8, The Threat is Real. This album was another of the 90s, attempts to be commercially successful with the singer John Bush. And I like this one just a little bit better than Sound of White Noise. In fact, out of the albums from that era, that 90s era where they were trying to be all commercial, this is the only one that I ever maybe throw on every now and then, and actually listen to. I enjoy this album. I would say that this album's a good album with a lot of good songs, but it suffers from a little bit of overproduction. Almost like they thought through it a little bit too much, and the flow is not 100% solid. I mean, they'll go from a kind of heavy song to like a wimpy song, and then they'll go into like a joking song, and they're just kind of all over the place, and it never really allows you to establish a flow. Volume 8, not one of the better Anthrax albums. That's my thoughts. Next up on my list is Anthrax's newest album, For All Kings. And this one, Anthrax has been trying to do like a comeback, going back to their roots, and they're kind of successful. I mean, it is kind of good to hear Anthrax returning back to the stutter step groove thing that made them, a force to be reckoned with in the 80s. But they still haven't pulled it off, and they still suffer from overproduction, overthinking. You can tell they're just trying to appeal to too many different crowds, and I hear it sounds like they're not just being themselves anymore. I mean, unless this really is themselves, I don't know. But I really, really wanted to like this album, but it's just too commercial sounding to me, and so it's not a bad album, but it's not really a good album either, in my opinion. Okay, yeah, next up on my list is 1985's Armed and Dangerous. This one has got the opposite problem of their later albums. This album is like Anthrax is still kind of trying to find their sound, that they're eventually going to find pretty soon. And it's like you can kind of see the glimmer of hope. You can kind of see that they're going to be a cool band soon. That they're going to be, one of the greatest, one of the great four bands pretty soon, but they're just still not there, and they're still kind of trying to find their sound and figure their place out in the universe or whatever. So when I listen to this album, there's moments where I'm like, yeah, Anthrax, and then there's moments where I'm like, oh, why did you do that? It's better than a lot of the John Bush albums, but still, this album really doesn't rank very high for me. So. Next up on my list is 2003's We've Come For You All. In my opinion, this is the best John Bush album for the Anthraxes. In fact, this is the only John Bush album that I really listen to from the Anthraxes. It was in the beginning of the 2000s where Anthrax kind of started trying to go back to their roots and become Anthrax again, and I'd have to say they kind of pulled it off a little bit with this album. This album's a good album. I really dig this album. It's got a lot of the heavy stuff. It's still got a little bit of that overproduced, commercial sound to it, but that in itself is not that bad of a thing. It's just really hard to pull off without kind of losing your identity, and I think that they came pretty close to doing that on this album, 2003's We've Come For You All. Alright, next up on my list is Anthrax's 2011 entry, Worship Music. This is the one that features the return of Joey Belladonna, and it's also a continuation of their 21st Century rebirth back into Anthrax. I love this album, actually. This is one of my more favorite Anthrax albums. This album's got some serious groove to it. It's got some killer riffs. It feels great. It does have a little bit of the commercial poppiness to it, but in a good way, and Joey Belladonna is on point here. In fact, I had to keep going back and rechecking if this was John Bush or Joey Belladonna, because he almost sounds like John Bush, but everywhere I've read it says it's Joey Belladonna, so, I guess that's who the singer is. But yeah, this is, out of their 21st Century albums, this is the best one. This one, if you dig Anthrax, this is a must-have Anthrax album. This album's great. Worship Music. All right, we are officially in the land of the good Anthrax albums now. Next up on my list is 1990's Persistence of Time. This album is very good. This album out of their really good late 80s. Which I'd consider this, even though it's 1990, this still kind of counts as the late 80s. I would say this is the worst of the really good albums, but that's okay. This album, is kind of like when they started getting popular and getting shown on MTV a lot, and, they started having a lot of videos and started doing all that rap crossover stuff that they were doing with, like, Public Enemy and stuff. And that's okay. That's cool. Consequently, after this would have been the last album with Joey Belladonna until 2011's Worship Music, which, I personally think that was a mistake for them to lose Joey Belladonna. He wasn't the greatest singer on the earth, but that's okay, man. It's all about the heart and the feel, and that dude had some heart and that dude had some feel. This album is sick. Pretty much every album on this, every song on this album is great. One weakness that I'd say of this album is that they made the songs a little bit too long. You know, I mean, they're like 6-minute epics. Like every song on here is like this epic long song. Not because it's actually epic, but because they repeat the riffs a little too much. I think that if they shorten up their songs just a little bit, maybe chopped out, you know, the third verse or whatever, or shorten, tighten things up a little bit, I think this album could have actually been a lot better. And so, you know, this album has potential to have been a better album than it actually is. But even that being said, this album is still very good, and to this day, I still love throwing this album on from time to time. Persistence of Time. All right, next up on my list, 1987's Among the Living. For a lot of folks, this is the best Anthrax album. Just about every list that I've seen, a lot of folks that I talk to think that this album's the best one. This is the one with all the hits, like I Am the Law and Caught in a Mosh and Indians, and then, of course, the title track, Among the Living. And this album's great. I love it, dude. And, you know, this album might be number one for me, too, if I hadn't listened to it over and over and over and over and over and over again. You know, but this album's got just a tad bit of hokiness to it that I think holds it back a little bit. In fact, that's kind of the story with Anthrax overall. Even though they're one of the great four of thrash, you know, the titans of thrash or whatever, I think that the reason that they come in fourth place out of the four great bands is that they're just a little too hokey sometimes, and I think that holds them back. And then eventually I think that's why they let Joey Belladonna go after Persistence of Time, which didn't work out very well, as most of you Anthrax fans probably know. But Among the Living is awesome. The title track is based on the Stephen King novel The Stand, you know, in reference to, you know, the stand against evil, you know, good versus evil, the age-old story of humanity, pretty much for all the time. But yeah, Among the Living, man, this album's good. Dun, 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 dun. Now I'm the walking dude. Yeah, this album rules. Among the Living. Alright, coming in next on my list is Anthrax's super excellent album, Spreading the Disease. This album doesn't get talked about enough. I absolutely love this album. This is 1985 this came out. This is the album that really saw Anthrax find its groove. They finally figured out who they were as a band. This is the album, in my opinion, that made the mark on the metal industry. And you know, and everyone talks about like Among the Living or Persistence of Time, but honestly, in fact, Spreading the Disease almost came in number one on this list. There's just one other album that just edges it out just a little bit for me, but ooh, I don't know, man. I go back and forth between this one and State of Euphoria as my favorite Anthrax album, because this album is just absolutely sick. It's got everything you want in a metal album, and Joey Belladonna's at his best. You know, Danny Spitz is rocking. I mean, Scott Ian's crushing. I mean, you know, Benante's killing on the drums back there. I mean, just this album is just a classic, super awesome Anthrax album. And yeah, Spreading the Disease, dude. Spreading the Disease. Okay, first place on my list. Here we go. The best Anthrax album of all time, 1988. State of Euphoria. 1988 was such a great year for metal and for music in general, man, and Anthrax is no exception. They put out their best album of all time here. State of Euphoria has everything good about Anthrax with none of the bad stuff. I mean, they do a little bit of the cheesy thing with that cheesy song 13, but that's okay because it's 50 seconds of you're going to laugh your balls off for a little while. And everything else that they do on this album is serious, diehard thrash metal. I mean, they're at their absolute best. I mean, the singing is killer, the rhythms are great, the bass player is killer, the drummer's killer, the writings are great, the lyrics are thoughtful and insightful, and just, oh man, as I'm listening to it right now, dude, I just want to bang my head. Anthrax, State of Euphoria. This is the best Anthrax album, hands down. There is no competition. State of Euphoria. All right, so now you know. Now you know what I consider to be the worst to the first Anthrax albums. Those are my opinions on the super excellent thrash band Anthrax, and let me know what you think about that below in the comments. I'm interested to hear your thoughts. Do you guys dig State of Euphoria? What do you think of that album? You know, what do you think of Spreading the Disease? What do you think about John Bush? You know, was Anthrax better off with John Bush, or were they better off with Joey Belladonna? I'm curious to hear your thoughts, man. Either way, dude, music is great. Thank God for music. And Anthrax is just one page in the large encyclopedia of the musical cosmos. God bless you and have a great day.